I think the reason why it's as painful as it is because we see it coming, right? I mean, we're watching, he's driving, first we're thinking, this is kind of a weird intro video for church. Then we see the train, we notice the truck starts to come closer, and we're like, oh, doesn't he see that? Oh no, oh! You know, we see it coming, right? And I think that's why it's easier to see. And we know that guy, if you've driven in the United States, or if you've driven in New Jersey, you know that guy lacked one essential virtue when you're driving, and that's patience, right? But it's easy for us to see from the outside and hard for us to see from the inside, I think. So it's easy for us to tell that guy stop, or the person in the horror movie to not look behind the door or whatever. But when we wake up and we get up late and our morning is rushed, and then we have to quick breakfast and we get in the car, and then of course this is the day that the road that I take 320 days out of the year they need to do construction on today. And the guy with the slow and the stop sign of slow, and he's standing there with the stop sign, and you're like, is the slow ever going to come? And then you make it to work, and it's one thing after another, and a person, and an annoying conversation, and a frustrating, right? And then at the end of the day, all of a sudden, you find yourself doing something, or you hear words coming out of your mouth, and you're like, how did that? So then you look back and say, how did I end up there? And it's because of the fact that it's a lot easier to see from the outside than it is to see from the inside. And patience is something that I think all of us struggle with. And it's a hard thing to catch. This morning, what we're going to do is continue to talk about the life of Abram. If you've been here over the last few weeks, Vince has been preaching on the life of Abram, and we're going to continue to talk about the life of Abram. And I think we're going to talk about a story in his life that if he was to look back, he probably would say, like, oh, I don't even know how I ended up there. Him and Sarai both. We're going to be talking this morning out of Genesis chapter 16. So if you want to open up your Bibles, grab a Bible, you can. We're going to read that in a little bit. But before we do, I want to kind of do a quick recap. So Vince has been talking about Abram and his life from the beginning when God called him in Genesis chapter 12. If you could write down or remember one word about Abram. When you think about Abram, think about Abraham in the Bible. If you could think about one thing, that word should be the word blessing. The word should be the word blessing. What's neat is in the original language, Abram's name and the Hebrew word for blessing, they're kind of similar. So there's all these fun word plays all over Genesis throughout the story of his life. And that's on purpose, because God is trying to communicate something about blessing through the person of Abram and his life. And so that's what you think about when you think about Abram. But really, in Genesis 12 through 15, God gives Abram a bunch of promises, doesn't he? We've talked about some of those. He gives him 4 promises. He tells him he's going to be a great nation. He tells him he's going to give him a great name. He tells him that he's going to be like a conduit through which people are blessed or cursed, right? And then he tells him that he's going to be with him all the time. He's going to protect him. And those 4 promises, we've seen those play out over time, right? So like when Abram goes to Egypt and Abram and Sarai lie, somehow Pharaoh gets in trouble. How's that work? Well, it works because that's what God has promised to do through Abram, right? The people that bless him will be blessed, and the people that curse him will be cursed. And so in a way, it doesn't matter if Abram in his humanity or Sarai in her humanity makes mistakes, because it's more about God than it is about them. God has a plan with their lives. And so that promise has started to be fulfilled, right? Even in small ways. When we see Abram show up in the life of Lot to go rescue Lot and his family members from those eastern kings that come in and conquer, and Abram gets the word, and he takes those 318 men, and he goes out and he rescues all the people that have been taken hostage. Remember, those eastern kings came in, and they fought. They didn't just fight Lot. They fought all of those city-state regions around the Dead Sea. They beat up on all of those people. So when Abram went to rescue people, he didn't just rescue his family members that were taken hostage. He rescued everybody. So by the time Melchizedek sits down with Abram, people knew who he was. This dude took 318 people and go beat up on some kings that none of those other people could take care of. That's an amazing man. So by that point, not only do people realize Abram is an impressive guy, and his name is already starting to be something that people know, and they clearly recognize that God is with this guy, right? God is with this guy. If he wasn't protecting him and with him, there's no way he could be doing the things that he's doing. And so God has already started to kind of fulfill these promises in one way or another. But there's one that is a problem, right? I mean, I said 4, and I only mentioned 3, and the last one is that God would make him a great nation. And so that's where we find Abram and Sarah. Genesis 12, he calls them out and says, I'm going to make you a great nation. Genesis 13, he calls them out and he says, I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the dust on the earth, right? The dirt on the earth. The dirt pieces all over the earth. I was just thinking this week about how many dirt pieces there are in my yard. Like a lot of dirt pieces. A lot of them. I don't know how many. And now it's the whole world. Genesis chapter 15 rolls around. It's almost 10 years has passed, and there's nothing. So if they're going to be as numerous as the dust on the earth and the stars in the sky, and I don't even have a son yet, how's that working? I don't understand. That's where Abram and Sarai find themselves, where we pick up with them in Genesis chapter 16. You know, this week I was kind of thinking about this sermon and thinking about impatience and things not being as you expect them to be, and just, kind of looking for ways to communicate that to you guys. And I was flipping through one of my old running apps, and I came across a few old notes I used to take. I don't know if any of you run and you use an app or whatever, and you write a note after your run or your exercise, like, good workout today, push it next time. But I don't do this very often, but I did for a while, and so I came across some of these. Like, this was one of the first ones. Don't judge my mileage time or my pace. Second run back, felt better, getting back into it. Nice little encouragement. Good job, buddy. And then like one like this. I used to take these, and what I would do is I would write down where I ran, so that I knew like what a 5K was. If I go out here and I make a right here and a left there and I go through there, or if I know this is 3 miles, I know this is 5 miles, whatever. So that was like directions. And then you come across ones like this. That wasn't a good run. No. But then, you recover. I got ones like this. Good job. Get out there even though it was raining. I tried to remember this. It was in 2013, but, I was proud of myself, I guess. And then, this is the one that I thought was the best. So you can't appreciate this story unless I share this story with you, and I'm going to share this story with you. So I ran this route. It was where we lived in New England. It was just awesome in New England, and about like half a mile to 3/4 of a mile from where we lived, it was just woods. It was hills. It was just gorgeous. So you could run, 3/4 of a mile to a mile and be in the middle of beautiful forests and hills and stuff. And so I ran this path pretty much all the time, and I ran early in the morning. And so it was just as the sun was kind of coming up to give you enough light to be able to see. Well, when you go into the woods, all of a sudden it gets dark again, even if it's kind of lighter out. So I'm running through the woods, and it's still pretty dark, but I can sort of see. And there's some water in the distance, like a lake, and there's some trees, and it's a clearing. And I had run up to the top of kind of a mountain. And as I'm running this way, I look this way and see something quite large, moving kind of fast. And I'm running, and I notice this thing, and I realize it's a coyote. Okay, now, this isn't a National Geographic show where I have a cage around me or a gun in my pocket or something, right? I'm in the wild with a coyote right over there. So he probably had no idea, well, he probably knew I was there, but he had no interest in me whatsoever, I'm assuming. And for whatever reason in that moment, I think to myself, what are you supposed to do in these circumstances? So I for some reason, think to myself, you're supposed to holler and scream at large animals. So I start hollering and screaming at this coyote, who all of a sudden is very interested in me, and stops and looks at me, and as I'm running, he now is looking at me, and now I'm freaking out. So I'm in the middle of the woods, and I stop, and I turn, and I say, "Ah! Ah!" and start screaming like a crazy person. Because, you're supposed to make yourself bigger than what you are to scare animals away. And so he turns and runs and thinks, it fool, I'm not eating that crazy human meat. That guy's nuts. I don't know what he thought, but thankfully he ran away. And so then I jumped down. I don't even remember how I got home. I think I literally just jumped down a bunch of mountains and stuff to get home. And I had run that trail tons of times. And after that, I had run that trail plenty of times. Never before and never again did I see a coyote. And I'm going to tell you something, in person, coyotes are kind of big. Anybody ever see a coyote in person? Yeah, they're kind of big. And they're really fast. And they're really scary. It's scary. It's one thing, 2 seconds before I saw that coyote, I'm sure I had music in my head and I was awesome. I was conquering every run and running marathons and beating everyone, and then there's a coyote and I'm immediately a 3-year-old child. That's kind of how it worked. I never saw a coyote again. And that was nothing like what I expected that day to go like at all. And in a way, that's where we pick up Abram. Now, you didn't see a coyote, but he's been living a very crazy life. And he's been trusting God and probably having very mundane days along the way. And he finds himself in a situation where he, like a crazy person, trusted God when God said he'd give him a kid in his 70s or 80s. That's an unbelievable promise. We just say unbelievable all the time. I'm going to break that word down for you, okay? It's unbelievable. It means it's not believable. But when God gave Abram that promise, he said, okay. Abram believed him. And here he is with nothing. He has no kid. He has nothing. That's where we pick up Abram in this story. And so Genesis chapter 16, we're going to start reading the first few verses. Chunk this story up into 2 pieces. I'm going to be reading from the ESV version. So it'll be a little bit different than the version that's in front of you. So if you're like me and you don't like listening to versions that are different than what you're reading, just listen. Most of the time I just listen anyway. I don't really read along in church. But if you have ESV, read, and if you are cool with translating on the fly. And I also forgot to mention, my name's Eric. For those of you that don't know me, I'm one of the covenant missionaries here at the church. Every so often, Vince has a lapse in judgment and allows me to preach. So here we are. Genesis chapter 16, we're going to read the first 6 verses. So it says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband as a wife. And he went into Hagar. He had sex with Hagar. That's what that means. And she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Okay, so we're going to stop there. So not really a super complicated story. That's the nice part about a lot of the Old Testament. But there's all kinds of cool stuff behind it, right? So Sarai makes this suggestion, but let's before we even get there, I want to point out a few things. Did you notice in verse 2, who does she say is responsible for her not being able to have a kid? The Lord, right? She's looking for somebody to blame for the situation she's in. She's been waiting, and there's nothing. So she says, the Lord is the one who has caused me to not be able to have a child. We do that, don't we? I mean, I do that. Maybe I'm just by myself. But when I'm in a situation where I'm waiting for something and it's taken forever, or I feel like God should be delivering on something and he's not, or I feel like something should be happening, I look around for somebody to blame. The promotion that didn't come is the boss's fault. The marriage that's falling apart is my spouse's fault. The relationship I have with my kids being in trouble is my kids' fault. We look for somebody else to blame when we're in situations that they're not changing and they're not how we expect. And that's what Sarai does. I appreciate her because I blame God for everything. I'm the worst. She blames God. She looks at God and says, he didn't let it happen, so it's got to be his fault. And then she comes up with this plan, right? Look, she looks around her, and in the ancient Near Eastern world she lived in, she would have seen a lot of people with a lot of wives, and a lot of people with one focused, loving wife, and then many other wives that bear more children. And she says, we could do that. I mean, Hagar, she's here. She's our maidservant. And I could give her to my husband, and he could have a child. And when God gave the promise to Abram, which I never heard, by the way, I mean, God gave it to Abram. He didn't necessarily involve me in the conversation. He said that Abram would be a great nation. So maybe it doesn't matter that I'm in the mix. So let's do that whole Hagar thing. So Abram has sex with Hagar, and Hagar conceives. And when Hagar conceives, it says that she looked at Sarai with contempt. Right? Uses that word contempt. Nobody really knows what that means. I mean, everybody knows that it wasn't good. She wasn't like, yay, But nobody knows what that means. Did she scoff at her? Did she say like, We don't know what it means, but we know that it was bad. And so Sarai goes to Abram and says something like, did you see her? And what she said to me, I don't know if she said it that way, but something to the effect, right? Did you see what just happened there? You better do something about that, because that curse is going to come on you. You better do something about that. And Abram, what he does, it's so beautiful, isn't it, right, the story? He sits them down, and he says, look, ladies, let's start off by praying. We really need to find some unity in our family here, and so, let's just talk about how the Lord is working in each of our lives, and there's just no strife here, right? I mean, it's really beautiful. No, he doesn't do that. The amazing thing about this week, and I'll be with you again next week to kind of round off this story, Abram is like, if he could have been a fly on the wall, he would have been. Other than for the fact that it takes two to tango to make a baby, he does and says very little. The key players in these stories are the women, not Abram. And so I don't know if he was like, I'm not even touching that. I don't know. But he has very little to do with it. And what does he say to Sarai? She's all yours. Do whatever you want with her. That was a wonderful thing to say, no? Wonderful. And so that's what Sarai does. She treats her so harshly that Hagar says, I'm out. Hagar, who depends on Abram and Sarai for her well-being, for her livelihood, for her meals, and who's pregnant with a baby. In the ancient Near Eastern world, she's leaving those people pregnant with a baby to go be a single mom. That didn't happen then. That just didn't happen. That gives you an idea of how terribly she was being treated, right? Really bad. And so Hagar says, I'm out of here. And that's where we pick it up in verse 7. This is where the fun starts. So verse 7 says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offering, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant, and you shall bear a son. you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand shall be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So she called the name of the Lord, who spoke to her, You are a God of seeing. For she said, Truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So, isn't that kind of amazing? I mean, this is always a dangerous question to ask, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. If you've ever sat through, if you've been a Christian for any length of time, if you've ever sat through a lengthy Bible study on the life of Hagar and Ishmael. We got 2, 3, okay? They're not people that are talked about very much, are they? And yet this is an amazing thing that happens here. Amazing. Amazing. So, why would folks that aren't necessarily all that important not really be talked about all that much if something like this happens in the Bible? Well, the part of the reason why is because Ishmael is associated with Islam. And so Christians and Jews over time have wanted to kind of distance themselves from this story and the things that go along with it, because there's a distinction between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. But at the same time, I think that one of the reasons why folks don't talk a lot about it is because it's hard to reconcile some of this stuff, yeah? I mean, an angel of the Lord shows up to Hagar, and then we're going to see next week some other really amazing stuff. So how do you reconcile that with, the Christian faith and what happens with Isaac later? And for those of you that are unaware of all that stuff, again, we'll talk about it next week. Come back. These are verses that aren't talked about a lot. They're just not. I tend to think, if any of you know me, that that's where the best gold in the Bible is. It's in the verses that everybody ignores or don't want to read or are nervous about because it's like, does that kind of conflict with what I believe? Oh, man. Recently read a quote, I think by a guy named Steve Timmons, that said, be so authentic to the Bible that people accuse you of contradicting yourself. It's a wonderful quote. It's a wonderful quote. Because the reality is, if you read this whole Bible, and not just the parts that fit the theology that we want to believe, there's some tough stuff to reconcile in here. Doesn't mean it's not true. Just means it's tough to reconcile. And so this is one of those stories. Hagar and Ishmael are 2 of those characters that it's kind of like, what do we do with this? So it's amazing stuff. Let's look at some of the pieces, and we'll see kind of what message we should be getting. The first few pieces you'll notice in the first few verses is, number 1, the angel says to her, let's read it. The angel says to her, verse 10, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. A little bit different words, but what's that sound like? Sounds like the promise to Abram, no? I mean, literally, exactly the promise to Abram. Wait, so hold on for a second here. So the angel who gave a promise to Abram and didn't even give it to Sarai is giving it to Hagar. What in the world is going on? He gives her the same exact promise. And he says to her, you'll bear a son, and his name will be Ishmael. Now let me just read something, and I'm going to stop. Behold, you are pregnant, and shall bear a son, and you shall call his name. That sounds familiar too, no? I mean, when I stopped, you're like, Jesus? Somebody else good? I don't really know. But it sounds really familiar, and it sounds really good. Wow. It's amazing. The message that the angel gives her is exceptional. She cries out, God hears, and an angel of the Lord shows up and speaks to her. What does that even mean? Let's look at the second part. Verse 12. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. Well, that doesn't sound all that good. I mean, yeah, took an interesting turn. What in the world does that mean? If you think about other birth narratives in the Bible, they tend to end a little different. Like Samson in Judges, his birth is foretold, and it says that he will begin to save the nation from the Philistines. That's a good tagline, no? Or back to the Jesus conversation in Luke chapter 1, it says, "You will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." That's a little different, isn't it? So, I think that we find ourselves in a little bit of a confusing spot, don't we? How do we, at the same time, appreciate and mine the importance of the fact that this woman, who's potentially, deserted to die, calls out to God, the angel of the Lord shows up to her, listens to her, gives her the same promise that Abram gets, and says, "You're all good, you're going to have a kid," and he's all right. With that last part, wild donkey of a man, nobody really knows what that means. Again, a lot of people have a lot of guesses. Some people think it was good with a bow and arrow. Some people think he would be a man of the woods, like Justin Timberlake. But nobody really knows what that means. But what they know is that the rest that comes isn't all that good. So the whole wild donkey of a man thing probably isn't good. Like his hand will be against everybody, and everybody's hand will be against him. And he'll be fighting with his family, his kinsmen, all the time. You know, those people that whoever blesses them will be blessed, and whoever curses them will be cursed. That Ishmael's not going to get along real well with those folks. So we already have hints that this isn't what we're expecting it to be, don't we? I mean, Sarai had a plan. Hopefully it works. Abram's got a kid. Beginning of this whole nations thing. God restates that promise to her. So maybe we're like, all right. But we already have hints that it's not going well. And there's a few other things we didn't talk about at the end, like the fact that, okay, this is the first time that the concept of the angel of the Lord shows up in the Bible. First time. Everything else, it's the Lord or it's God. This is the first time that the angel of the Lord shows up. So what does that mean? God doesn't come, he sends a messenger. So does that mean that he doesn't care about her? Does that mean, we don't really know what that means, but we do know is that it's slightly removed, isn't it? It's slightly removed. At the end, I don't know if you noticed that, well, first of all, Sarah and Hagar hate each other. That's not good, right? I mean, it's not, most of the time when that happens, things don't go good. They go bad. And then I don't know if you noticed at the end of the verses, at the end of the chapter that we read, did anybody notice whose name was missing? Look at the verses and see if you can tell whose name isn't mentioned at all. Sarai. It's nowhere. It's nowhere. So the wife of Abram, the man through whom everyone's going to be blessed, isn't even in the story. That's not good. That's just not good. We already have glimpses of the fact that this is just not what we're anticipating it to be. They find themselves in a situation that they do not expect. They get impatient, so they come up with a plan to try to fix it. And maybe it's been fixed, but things feel like they're already kind of starting to fall apart a little bit. And I don't know about you, but I can relate to that. I can relate to that. There are all kinds of promises that God has made to me that I have through my relationship with Jesus Christ. There are all kinds of other promises that God didn't make to me, but I think I deserve because I'm entitled. I'm alone. Okay, at least one person laughed. I think God should give me all kinds of stuff. And so I look around and I want that stuff, and when I don't get that stuff, I wait long enough until I can't wait anymore, and then I try to make it happen for myself. Like take joy, for instance. That's a great one. We all expect and want joy and happiness in our lives because we walk with Jesus, right? And so we look around and we see, people we know to go to the gym all the time, and they're like ripped and they look good and they're skinny and like all the endorphins running around. So they're always like, "Hi, how are you?" And we're like, why, I got Jesus. I got the joy down in my heart, right? And they got just to go to the gym. Why don't I have the joy they have? Or we look at our friends at work that they go out like Friday nights and party and stuff and like, "Oh, come out with us." And you're like, no. And then you're like, well, they have so much fun. And then we join them once and they, "Oh, well, you have a drink." And we're like, "No, that's okay, And then we go a few more times. And then, the first time we say yes to a drink, it's like one drink and we're buzzed. And then like the second and third time and fourth time, now it's like 2 or 3 drinks and we're okay, Or like we look around at people with relationships, spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, and we say, "Wow, they're just so happy. I don't want to die alone." Or we look around with people with kids and say, "Man, its family is just perfect. Why can't I have a family like that?" And so we wait, and we wait, and we pray, and we wait, and probably start to pray less sometimes. And then we say, "Well, the folks at the gym are happy, so maybe if I get some of this weight off and start having a regular exercise routine, maybe I'll feel better. Maybe I'll be happier. Or, maybe I should just say yes to that thing. It's just that they're just going out like once a week. It's not a thing. It's just, I'll just go and then enjoy myself. There's nothing wrong with that." Or we search for that person that we want to marry or be with. And over time, what happens is, if you were to look at our lives and kind of calculate the hours and the dollars that we spend pursuing that thing that we think will give us that joy we've been waiting for, you'd start to realize that we're investing ourselves in that stuff and not necessarily in our relationship with the Lord to try to get those things. And slowly this decreases and this increases. Now, I'm not saying that Christians are fat, single, childless, and poor. That's not what I mean. What I'm saying is this, and if you've been struggling to listen. What I'm saying to you is this: if you're searching for a solution to a problem that only God can solve, then God is the solution. You hear what I'm saying? If you're searching for a solution to a problem that only God can solve, then God is the solution and nothing else. Nothing else. So seek Him. Don't seek other things. I can relate, and I'm sure you can too. I don't know what it is for you, but sometimes we find ourselves down a road where we're almost trying to help out God, We're trying to help Him move it along. And that saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions isn't like, a saying for no reason. I think that we can find ourselves moving down a road just because we want to be moving, and then look back and realize we're on the wrong road. I just wanted to see progress here, and now I don't even know where I'm at. And so my encouragement to you this morning is to begin to think about those times where you're looking at your life and you see yourself moving ahead, but you're doing it from a place of impatience, or potentially, if you're honest enough with yourself, lack of faith. Unbelief that God can do what He says He can do. Maybe you're blaming Him, maybe you're blaming somebody else, I don't know. But before you get too far, begin to notice that. I'm not going to tidy this up for us this morning. I kind of wrestled with this because I've actually never ended a message like this before. I'm going to leave y'all hanging. Because next week we're going to talk about essentially the end of this story in Genesis chapter 21. But I want to ask you to do something right now. Take out your cell phone or your iPad or your calendar or your planner or a piece of paper, your Palm Pilot. I don't know. Anybody have a Palm Pilot? don't have those anymore, right? No Palm Pilots in here. Take out whatever. I don't care. If you don't have a piece of paper, your neighbor will smile and give you a piece of paper and potentially a pen. I'm going to ask you to do something. Preachers don't want to admit this, but if I'm lucky, 15 to 20% of what I've said, you'll remember. If I'm lucky. If God was at work in you and His Spirit was working in you and my words were His words, that much. This just becomes a pep talk unless something else happens, guys. That's all it is. It's just a motivational talk, and then you leave and you're like, that's what I'm talking about, and then in an hour you're flipping through Netflix and nothing is different. Right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is something a little different. With your Palm Pilot and your little stylus, I'm going to ask you to pick a time this week between now and next Sunday where you can go into some place somewhere and read Genesis chapter 21. That's it. You don't have to read Genesis 21 through 40. You don't have to tell anybody you're reading it. Just read it. It's a short chapter. It's not long. And if you do it, you'll kind of see how this connects with Genesis chapter 16, and we'll pick it up next week, and you'll be right there with me. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds of silence for you to do that. All right? All right, if you haven't picked a time, I'd encourage you before you leave to just do it before you leave. And as you read that and do in that time, I want you to just think all throughout the week about this question. Is there any area of your life where you're moving ahead with something and you're acting out of impatience? Maybe you've been waiting. Guys, I've been waiting 10 years for some stuff. 10 years. And I might wait for the rest of my life. I understand. I get it. I get it. Enough is enough with some stuff. But what we don't want to do is make a bad situation worse, right? We want to seek God for the things that only He can solve. So is there any area of your life where you're moving ahead with something and really you just need to be more patient? You're moving ahead because you don't trust that God can take care of it. And He's the only one that really can. Think about that stuff. Bring it with you next week, and we'll pick up with the life of Ishmael and Hagar. The worship team's going to come up and close with a song, and I'm just going to pray for us as they're coming up here. Thanks for bearing with me. This is always fun for me. Let me pray. Would you pray with me, guys? Lord, you know, we're just doing our best to get through this whole thing. This thing that is life, that continues to throw us curveballs and surprises us. What sometimes feels like at every turn, and other times we feel like we've got a little bit of a break. And Father, we are so into this thing. We care so much about You. We're so all in with our faith that we want the things You say we can have. We want them so badly that sometimes we're even willing to overstep and do things that aren't focused on You to get that stuff done. Protect us from ourselves. Help us to begin to see those areas, Lord, because without Your Holy Spirit working in our hearts, there's some things we're just never even going to see. We're never even going to see that we're stepping too far. So help us to see those things and begin to do a work in us to help us understand what we need to do differently and how we need to focus on You more so. Jesus, we love You so much, and We are in it. Teach us how to do that well. We love you. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.